For nearly 2 decades, Elton John has spoken, written, and sung about one friendship more than almost any other in his long life: his bond with Diana, Princess of Wales. It was a friendship that began at an awkward royal birthday party, deepened through scandal and shared grief, fractured over pride, and ended in a tragedy that Elton turned into the best-selling single in music history. This is the real story, drawn from Elton's own published account in his 2019 memoir, Me, along with his interviews over the years. Not rumor, not dramatization, but what he himself has chosen to confirm. The year was 1981. Elton John was already a fixture in certain royal circles. The Queen Mother enjoyed his music, and Princess Margaret had hosted him for dinner at Kensington Palace years earlier, though that particular evening ended in a marital row between Margaret and her husband, Lord Snowdon, rather than pleasant conversation. So when Elton was invited to perform at Prince Andrew's 21st birthday party at Windsor Castle, he wasn't a stranger to royal occasions, but he still found himself in surreal territory. The ballroom held a disco, turned down so low that guests could hear their own shoes on the floor. At one point, Elton found himself dancing to Rock Around the Clock alongside Princess and the Queen herself, handbag still in hand, while he tried his best to look like this was a perfectly normal Tuesday. Then a young woman walked in, Diana Spencer, weeks away from announcing her engagement to Prince Charles. According to Elton, the discomfort of the evening evaporated the moment she arrived. He later wrote that she had an unusual gift, the ability to make almost anyone feel instantly comfortable in her presence. The two of them ended up mock dancing the Charleston together, laughing at how thin the music in the room sounded. It was, by his account, an immediate connection, the start of a friendship neither of them could have predicted would last the rest of her life. Over the following years, Elton and Diana's paths crossed often, at galas, concerts, royal functions, and eventually at Live Aid 1985, where she was photographed chatting with Elton and George Michael backstage. What developed between them wasn't simply showbiz politeness. Elton has described Diana as wonderful company, sharp, funny, an enthusiastic gossip who would tell you almost anything you wanted to know, and genuinely interested in the people around her rather than performing for them. Part of what bonded them, by Elton's own account, was that they were each, in different ways, outsiders inside institutions that demanded performance. He was a famous, openly gay musician under constant tabloid scrutiny in an era when that scrutiny could be vicious. She was a young woman who had married into one of the most rigid and image-conscious institutions in the world, and who increasingly found herself isolated by it. They recognized something in each other. Diana's effect on people, especially men, became something of a running joke between them. Elton coined a phrase for it in his memoir, the Diana effect, describing how even confident, famous men seemed to lose their composure around her. He recounted one dinner party where two Hollywood stars, Sylvester Stallone and Richard Gere, became so competitive for her attention that the evening nearly ended in a physical altercation, with Stallone reportedly storming out and complaining about Prince Charming stealing his moment. Behind the parties and headlines, this was also a friendship rooted in causes they both cared about. Diana became one of the most visible advocates for AIDS patients at a time when the disease carried enormous stigma and fear. Elton, who would go on to found the Elton John AIDS Foundation, has pointed to a single photograph, Diana shaking hands with an AIDS patient at London's Middlesex Hospital without wearing gloves, as a moment that helped shift public attitudes almost overnight. He didn't believe she set out to make a political statement with that gesture. He believed it was simply who she was. That shared commitment, alongside genuine personal affection, carried their friendship through the 1980s and into the 1990s, even as Diana's marriage to Prince Charles grew increasingly strained and eventually ended in divorce in 1996. In 1997, that long friendship hit its most serious test. Elton had been working with the fashion designer Gianni Versace on a coffee table photography book called Rock and Royalty, with proceeds intended for Elton's AIDS Foundation. Diana had agreed to write the foreword, a meaningful gesture from someone whose name carried enormous weight. Then she withdrew. The book contained images of musicians and public figures alongside some semi-nude male models. And according to Elton, Buckingham Palace was uncomfortable with the idea of a royal being associated with that kind of project. Diana, as he put it, got cold feet. Elton didn't take the news well. He has admitted he let her know he was unhappy about it, and the exchange that followed turned cold. The two stopped speaking. For months, a friendship that had survived over a decade of scandal, scrutiny, and personal turmoil simply went silent. Not because of some dramatic betrayal, but because of mutual stubbornness. Neither one picked up the phone. The silence ended in July 1997 under tragic circumstances. Gianni Versace, a close friend to both of them, was murdered outside his home in Miami Beach. The shock of his death broke through whatever pride had kept Elton and Diana apart. Diana called Elton at his holiday home in Nice. He later said he wasn't even sure how she'd gotten the number, since he hadn't had the house long. She apologized for what she called a silly falling out and asked if they could simply be friends again. He said yes. Days later, at Versace's funeral in Milan, a photograph captured what looked like a tender, grief-stricken moment between them. Diana leaning toward Elton as if offering comfort. The image became iconic. But Elton later revealed the truth behind it with characteristic humor. She wasn't comforting him at all. She was reaching past him for a mint that his husband, David Furnish, had offered. The much-discussed words of solace caught in that famous photograph, he said, were actually her asking for a polo mint. It was a small, very human moment, and, as it turned out, one of the last times they would ever be together. Just 6 weeks after Versace's funeral, in the early hours of August 31st, 1997, Elton learned that Diana had been killed in a car crash in Paris, in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, while being pursued by photographers. She was 36 years old. Elton has described the news as almost impossible to process, that only weeks earlier they had been standing together, laughing through their grief over a mutual friend, and now she was gone too. The Spencer family asked him to perform at her funeral, and he turned to his longtime songwriting partner, Bernie Taupin, to help rework the lyrics of Candle in the Wind, a song originally written in tribute to Marilyn Monroe in 1973. The new version, retitled Goodbye England's Rose, opened with a line that would become inseparable from Diana's memory. On September 6, 1997, Elton performed the song inside Westminster Abbey in front of a global television audience estimated in the billions. He has said that for those few minutes, the world's attention was entirely on him, but that it never felt like an Elton John moment. It was, in his words, about her and about the two young sons standing nearby who looked, in his description, completely shell-shocked. The single version of Goodbye England's Rose went on to become the best-selling single in UK and US chart history, with more than 30 million copies sold worldwide. Elton has never described that achievement with pride. To him, its success only meant that footage from Diana's funeral was repeated endlessly on television, week after week, as the song held the top of the charts. It wasn't something to celebrate. It was a private grief that the world had turned into a chart statistic. In the years since, Elton has spoken about the months of silence before Versace's funeral as one of his deepest regrets. Not because of who was right about the book, but because pride kept two old friends apart for longer than it should have. He has said plainly that if he could go back, he would have simply picked up the phone and apologized sooner. That regret appears to have shaped how he's approached Diana's sons in the decades since. Elton has remained close to Princes William and Harry, hosting them privately and speaking out publicly, particularly in defense of Harry, about the dangers of media intrusion, the same kind of pursuit that contributed to Diana's death. He has described a sense of duty to protect her sons from the press in a way he wasn't able to protect her. What remains, more than anything else in Elton's own retelling, is the memory of an ordinary, funny, occasionally indiscreet friend. Not a tragic icon frozen in a single photograph, but a woman who could disarm Hollywood stars, hold the hand of a dying AIDS patient without flinching, and ask for a mint in the middle of a funeral because that's simply who she was. Their friendship, as Elton has told it, was never about royalty or fame. It was about two people who happened to find each other inside very different kinds of spotlight, and who, for a while, made the noise a little more bearable for one another.